Hey everybody, so blessings today. Feeling really grateful for my life and for my family, and just been studying Proverbs, and so gonna discuss it. Uh, so in Proverbs 11:26, the people will curse him who withholds grain, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. And this does not say gives it away. I don't think the old way was to just distribute and sort of be a communist in that way of wealth sharing, but rather to not hoard, but to give an opportunity for business to flow and for people to actually have a chance to buy. And I think that's how we need to deal with our agriculture nowadays. There's a lot of problems in destroying food production and rich people buying farms and making them non-productive now. That's just not right. Um, in 12:23, a prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims foolishness. I think what this is talking about is to not try to broadcast and not try to impart your views into others who are not interested, and to not try to proselytize, which is often a challenge with religious people today. Just to be normal and regular, humble, and but I do believe that when the channel is opened and when there is a good discussion about testimony and honor and people are consenting to it, I do think it's good to try to let the wisdom flow, but in as humble a way as you can. That's the least about yourself and about self-aggrandizement. Um, and so in 13:18, poverty and shame will come to him who disdains correction, but he who regards a rebuke will be honored. Um, I've been trying to listen to the rebukes of others, and it hurts, and I can get defensive, very defensive. A lot of that comes from my childhood because I think, to some extent, I was overly rebuked that didn't consider my feelings and sensitivity, and so I developed a hard heart against that. But I'm trying to lovingly rebuke myself. I find when I harshly rebuke myself, or when others do it harshly to me, I shut down and I don't grow. But if I can give and receive the gentle rebukes, then I can say, yeah, I can take that into consideration and grow as a person. In 13:24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Um, I don't necessarily believe in hitting kids. I think the rod is more metaphorical in terms of the sturdy and unflinching and unbreakable word of the Father. And so I really try to bring that to my son, and he responds extremely well. I mean, he is just so honorable and respectful. And if I say, he's 20 months old, if I say, hey, buddy, gonna have to put that diaper on, come right over here. He just comes over, lets me put the diaper on. No problem, no fighting. Um, in 13:13, he who despises the word will be destroyed, but he who fears the commandment will be rewarded. The church and the synagogue over the last few thousand years has actually made a lot of mistakes, and they've done a lot of wrong things. I was treating a patient yesterday whose brother was raped within the Catholic Church by the priest. And so we need to face this, and we need to say, rather than having a hierarchy where we stand for the depredations of these people who are supposedly our intermediary between us and God, where we need to actually hold them accountable and say they have to be of an even higher morality. And I think part of the problem with all the pain and all the worship of Sheol and Satan that happens nowadays, and all the lost people, particularly lost youth, a lot of that actually has to do with how we've let our churches and synagogues slip and fall. I'm not a member of the local synagogue, despite there being some nice people within it, because their policies are hierarchical, ridiculous, top down. They still make people wear masks. I mean, and so they can rebuke me and say that I'm, failing to be a worshipful Jew, but realistically, I have no interest in participating in something. They're just people. I don't feel like they should have that authority over me. And I'm also very interested because a lot of people claim that the Torah and the Bible are misogynistic and are hating on women. So particularly in this video and continuing on, I want to make a strong adherence to when they mention respect for women. So in 14:1, the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish pulls it down with her hands. And I think it's important to note how honored women are in even this ancient time, thousands of years ago, when women were treated as cattle, that here we're talking about a woman building her own house. And how can a woman build her own house, and how can she tear it down? Some of that is spiritual, and how she perceives the masculine. And so when she abandons the man, and when she fails to teach and to instruct and to steward and help essentially raise the man, she then tears down her own house. Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox. That's 14:4. I happen to have an amazing wife who's the year of the ox, and I gotta say that having her, there's more items and some more mess, but goodness gracious, it's just so beautiful to have her. And I think it's important to remember what really stands is not the items and the orderliness of things, but rather the merit and the love and the presence of children. And I'm working on remembering that. And so then in 15:16 through 17, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. Better is a dinner of herbs or vegetables where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. Our culture in the United States, one of the false idols, the false gods that we worship is immensity of success and of great wealth. And I'm realizing that I have been lost in that and in a fear state about having enough and obtaining enough. And it's reasonable given how difficult it is economically for my generation. It's even more difficult for the up-and-coming young adults to get basic things like a house, a car, food. And that's a problem. But there is a place that I've reached where now I can truly relax on the whole wealth gathering thing. And I can trust that if I give my service, that I'll have enough. And that's a beautiful thing. This goes back to Exodus with collecting enough manna. That you'll always have enough, but if you try too hard, you won't have excess. And so in 15:20, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. This is in full vulnerability. I've had a lot of time where I despised my mother and my father, and I honestly thought that they despised me. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of people feel this, and there's a huge, huge disconnect where people don't stay connected with their parents. There's a huge amount of estrangement and hate. It's a lot of the reason why elder parents end up in these nursing homes, which are very abusive and expensive and very lonely. And so something happened within my youth. It reached past a threshold of distrust and of not supporting the righteous, where, I was vulnerable and innocent, and I learned up to harden my heart and despise my mom. And it's honestly, it's my greatest regret. Among those regrets is like mistreating my first wife and not treating her as sacred and not just like loving her unconditionally. But that kind of connects up with my despising of my mom. And what I found since my mom passed away, and I mean, we had a lot of love and we had a lot of goodness, but what I found since she passed away is to find love for her in my heart and to find forgiveness. And that's where I really love Emmanuel. I really love Jesus, because when I let Jesus into my heart, there's a lot of like, come on, dude, the right thing is to forgive and the right thing is to love her. And that her transgressions really it was a challenging path for her. It was confusing, and she had a lot of pain from her family that she grew up with, and her epigenetics. She was a Holocaust survivor, her parents were Holocaust survivors, and they imparted that to her. And so I'm finding a lot of love, and as I release, and as I realize that I'm safe, I recognize all the ways that she supported me, and I recognize that, I've lost somebody who truly loves me. I've lost her presence as a human. I still have her presence as a spirit. and I still have her presence in my blood and in my children, and so I'm thankful for that. In 1524, the way of life winds upward for the wise, that he may turn away from hell or Sheol below. There's moments of doubt and pain as we heal, as we go through time, as we go through our Saturn returns, our Chiron returns, these astrological developments in our life, where it seems like we're not making any success. But I will say it does get better and better and better. And the more faith and trust you have, the more you clean up your life, you do small things, you make your bed, you clean your room, you clean your house, you clean your finances, you do your workouts, you make your hot food, you take care of others, you do stuff for others. And it really does get progressively better. I gotta say, I'm 40 years old now, and I feel so grateful. And when I was 31, 32, I literally thought maybe I should just die, that I was worthless, that life wasn't worth living. And what has happened in those years? These children have come, this opportunity to serve, and I'm not alone in feeling this tremendous pain. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are in pain. And I don't think you have to wholesale buy into Christianity or Judaism or Islam or anything in order to get out of that pain. I think it's a matter of buying into love and buying into recognizing this limited human incarnation that you're living is an opportunity to experience the infinite and to experience joy and to be part of something really beautiful in this time span that you're given. In 1530, the light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and a good report makes the bones healthy. Sometimes, what if we're just working at Jamba Juice? What if we're working in a small job and we don't necessarily have something that's very highly honored by the society? To be honest, you can send huge love and you can spread God's work simply by speaking a loving truth and by having light and having love and goodness within your eyes. We can't really know the long-term impacts of it. And we also can't, if I work in my clinic and do amazing acupuncture and people call me a hero and they believe that I've saved them, that might not actually save them. It might not be doing anything. But if I just honor somebody who's pumping my gas and say, dude, here's $3, thanks for pumping my gas, respect to you, that might touch his heart, and that's what I try to do, is you keep it humble, but try to keep that love coursing through you. In 16:1, the preparations of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. And what I think this means is you train and you train and you train and you train, and then when it comes to go time, you almost release your own identity and your own sense of self and, how am I going to be perceived? And you let God speak through you. But the Bible study, the prayer meditation, the works that you do, the focus that you do, the gym, all that stuff, it gets you ready so that you can be a vessel for those words to come out. And it's just about releasing all the egotism and letting the medicine speak through you. And so in 16:7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. I've actually had enemies in my life. I've had, invulnerability. People have tried to kill me. And people have come after me to try to denigrate my reputation and destroy my career, or to claim things about me in my sexuality that would, ruin my ability to give service. And I'm thinking about those people and how I've tried to make peace with them. The more that you shine your light, there are going to be people who are on the narcissist spectrum or who are on the sociopath spectrum who see that, and you're a threat to them, and they come after you. And if you stand up for the righteous, there's a lot of people who are filled with tyranny, and they're going to look to attach to you and to see you as a threat to them. And there was a person who ran his dogs after me, and I had to stand up for myself. And then later he really wanted to pick a fight with me while I was holding my son. He's a big, strong guy. And I was just trying to have him keep his dogs on the leash because, I didn't want his dogs running up on my kids, big dogs. And later on, I brought some lamb and some beef to his house, and I just said, bless you. And now I see him on the street, and it's like it's all peace, And I'm gonna look to even apologize to him more and just say, listen, you know, like I don't need to be right. I just need there to be peace. And the same happened with a neighbor. He called me a scoundrel, a charlatan, a thief, simply because I was trying to get repairs done on our shared properties. And it really hurt because I didn't know myself that well. But eventually I just yielded the position to him. And I was like, look, maybe you should be in charge. Maybe you should be the boss of this. And I stepped back, and it allowed me to concentrate more on my family. So I think that's the way of Christ. And I think it's like, love your enemy, but if they're shooting, shoot back. And that's okay. And then, so, in 17:3, the refining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts. I think what this is talking about is alchemy. And so, there's an alchemy that you can do in the chemistry in real world where you actually work with precious metals, but there's an alchemy in your heart and soul that's through your connection to God. And that's what we want to refine and get that purity and find like the pure gold and wisdom. And that's work. And it takes fire and it takes shape. It takes the mold to do that. 17:5, he who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. I don't think we should celebrate tragedy against people, even our enemies, but I think we should even attend their funerals and honor them because they were just led astray, and all of us has the opportunity to be led astray. All of us has the capacity to be deluded, and you're not fully in control of the fact that you're somebody who maybe has been given wisdom or has been raised right. And I think it's important to have the most compassion for the people who are astray. That doesn't mean to let them walk all over you or destroy you, but it means to not celebrate their pain or their hurt. So in 17:17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. I believe that friendship and brotherhood among men is extremely important. As a man, I believe that for me this is extremely important, and this is a lot of the work I do, and it's a lot of the effort that I put out. And I feel so blessed with my brothers and my friends. It is just such a pillar for me. So in 18:16, a man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. So I'm seeing Jordan Peterson start his group in London with these 2,000 eminent people, and I'm like, I want to be part of that. But I'm actually just 40 right now, and I'm just humble in my profession, and I'm just getting, my family going and learning to clean my room and take care of my money. And, so I think through solid, small efforts accumulated over time, you get to the point where you rise up among the ranks of the judges, to the point where now you're like, you get authority because of virtue and because of merit earned slowly over time through making the right choices over time. And let's see. In 21:19, it's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. I witnessed my family where my mother was extremely contentious and angry almost all the time. There was like a sweet era where she was very loving, and then there was just a deeply contentious and angry era. And I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't be with that kind of a woman. But here's the thing, if I'm weak, or if I'm afraid, or if I fail to show up in integrity, it creates contention and anger in my woman. But if I legitimately am in integrity and really showing up, and I can honestly say that to her and to myself, like, hey, I'm in integrity about this topic, and even on the things I was out of integrity with, I'm back, then I give her, the ball is in her court. And if she is able to be loving and harmonious with me, then I stick around. And if she isn't, then I'm not going to force myself to stick around. It's better to go into the wilderness like Jesus did, like David did, and then eventually it's going to materialize to have a woman show up. I don't believe we should that marriage is a hill to die on. It's mutual, but also I have to shine that light on myself. It's better for her to be in the wilderness than for her to deal with me as a contentious man. So I have to look into myself and find out if I'm being selfish, if I'm being contentious, if I'm being judgmental. And I honestly, in full vulnerability, I have a bunch of work to do in that. I have to learn about that. It's about selfishness. But if we can both get to that place and reasonably be within harmony, then of course we want to stick around and stick with the relationship because it's for the children. So in 25:18, a man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Right now, there's an expression of narcissism and tyranny that is like reputational ruin, where people lose their professions and where they speak in false witness. And I really believe this to be a tremendous sin. I'd like there to be a more significant penalty, not just in terms of slander or libel, which is not as much criminal as it is a civil penalty. I believe there should be criminal penalty for perjuring oneself against somebody, and I believe that right now you're guilty until proven innocent, particularly as a man, and particularly if women blame you for doing some transgression, sexual or otherwise. What I'd like to see is that you're innocent until proven guilty, as is fundamental to our Constitution, and that those who perjure themselves against others are actually criminally penalized. And in 25:28, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. I believe that we can rule over our own spirit, but it's not just ourself ruling over our own spirit. It's we open up to God's message and we release the need to control, and then this greater power fills us and becomes part of us. And at that point, we can begin viewing the vicissitudes of spirit, the pain, the suffering, the self-hate, the doubt, the existential crises, and we can just kind of give them up to God, just like Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. We can sacrifice our ideas and our views, particularly about ourselves and about the judgment and hate of others, and then we can have the rule over our own spirit. But it's not the individuated self, it's the self in the connection with God that does that. And in 26:17, he who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. I think that there is a point that one can get in there and mitigate a quarrel, but I think it's by the authority of becoming a judge. And this is what's talked about by Jordan Peterson through Exodus. As one becomes a judge, one has to be able to not coerce or dominate to cause two warring parties to come to some kind of forced solution, but one has to use divine wisdom to come up with a win-win solution by which we can have peace. So I think, the Proverbs, it's important, don't meddle in quarrels that are not yours, and particularly where those people don't consent to your authority. But you might want to just check in and be like, hey, I'm a man of God. Is it possible that we can come to peace? Is it possible that we can come to a win-win solution? And I've done that at the peril of my own life. I've seen a woman about to get beat up by a guy, and I just stepped in and I threatened the guy. And that was pretty, youthful, and it was kind of folly. It was in a foreign country. I mean, I could have gotten killed. But it just felt like I couldn't let this woman get beat up. Like it was an absolute no for me. But what I really could have done, particularly if I had really known their language, is just say, yo, can we have peace? Like, this is not right. And, okay, so in 27:12, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. The simple pass on and are punished. So my grandpa had a brother, my grandpa Benyek and his brother Zalman. Zalman figured out that the Nazis were coming to Poland, and he got the heck out of Dodge before the war started, and he was able to get a family going in Australia that ended up having a lot of affluence, and now there's like a huge amount of descendants, a bunch of kids and grandkids that come off of Zalman. Whereas my grandpa was caught up in the Holocaust and lived through it. He tried to fight. There wasn't even enough rifles around for him to fight. He had to go back into the concentration camp just to survive. I mean, horrible experience. And I see evil coming. I mean, it's clear to me that there's a real darkness and a takeover trying to happen. And the question is, do we hide ourselves, or do we take refuge in a holy place where we can defend ourselves? And I think that the early Jewish way had almost a victim consciousness where we would flee rather than fight, but at some point we realized we had to fight. So in 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. This is like me with my men's group and the other men. We really make ourselves stronger. And so surrounding yourself with good, strong people who help you become sharper is very valuable. And in 27:20, hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. I think you can find satisfaction and peace in this world by being a person of service and by having your family in your home. I think part of God's message is that there is a deep satisfaction. There is a wholeness that we can find. And it's by understanding that so many of the things we seek are like digging a hole in the sand. The sand keeps pouring back in. Wealth, you can never really have enough. Items, sex, reputation, prestige, you can never really have enough. Even Michael Jordan, now he's no longer the best player in the NBA. He aged out, right? But I think you can have that satisfaction by simply walking in the way of God and trusting and recognizing your own death and having gratitude about the fact that you have this life. I also felt called to talk about abortion. I used to be more pro-abortion. I particularly attempted to I participated in an abortion. And I also had other partners chose to abort babies that we had made. And I feel tremendous pain about that. At the same time, I do trust in God, because if I had been caught up with those particular partners and trying to steward those children, I wouldn't have had the children that I have now, which are children that I can really be in their life and have a great connection with their mothers. And I'm glad that the Supreme Court ruled as it did, because what we have now is a decent compromise. Each state chooses what their abortion law is going to be, whether they're going to have it or not allowed. And this is good, because if you really, really support abortion and perceive it as a woman's right to choose, then you can concentrate yourselves in those states. And those states can be like the cities of refuge, as talked about in the Pentateuch, where, that can be a thing that's had. But then people who want to not have abortions around, they should have a right to live in a place that doesn't have that. And so I think that's working out. Eventually, within 40, 50 years, a lot of the places that are really pro-abortion, those populations will die out because they're not having as many kids, and because a lot of them ruin their wombs and their chance to have kids. And then the other places who are against abortion will have more kids and raise them, and hopefully raise them in the light of God. And so those places will rise. So I try not to get... It's an upsetting thing. It's like 1.5 million abortions per year in America in the last 50 years, since the Roe v. Wade. And it is very upsetting, but I also see God's plan, and I don't necessarily need it to be this sweeping, coercive power, top-down power thing that pushes it on everybody, because what that does is it pushes it underground. People are still going to get it. But rather, we have to just lovingly educate and really create a space for children to be loved and welcomed, especially among people who don't have the finances to raise the kids on their own and who don't have the support of the father. So we have to teach men, you got to stick around and be there and watch out for your kids. that's a lot of the reasons abortion happens. So I think, being against abortion, totally fine, respect, but the right way is not to force. The judges in the old days, you couldn't force. People had to believe that the judgment was just and coming from a more divine source rather than from a human or individuated source. And so I think that's how to move forward with it, is to just help people, to help women, to help families, to help people understand, and to honor that, women do have a right to choose. They have a right to choose to have sex, to choose to get married, or to choose to use contraception, even though unfortunately a lot of contraception hurts women's bodies. And that's a great exercise of choice. And we also have to look at, as a culture, where is women's choice compromised? Where are they having sex because it gets them some kind of financial support? Where can't they really say no? Or where are they coerced or colonized or caught up with a belief structure that's not their really most high personal belief structure? A lot of people nowadays are disempowered and they don't realize that they can exercise power. So I think it's important to promote and nourish those things, and that's probably strategically the best way to stop the abortions. So in 28:9, one who turns away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer is an abomination. Well, what is the law? So right now we have some laws that are bad laws. Like in Canada, they compel speech. You have to call somebody by their preferred gender pronoun on pain of legal criminal prosecution. So is that God's law? I think that we can look at the Ten Commandments and we can look at the merits of the Old Testament and find a basis for law, a basis for morality. And if we can come to an agreed upon basic moral premise, then we can judge whether the law is one that we are, that should be compelled to keep or not. In 28:14, happy is the man who is always reverent, but he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity. I'll be honest, I have hardened my heart so many times. And the softening of the heart is painful and it's scary, because so many times when I've softened my heart or had it open, I've been wounded, or I've let people in and then had to push them out again because I found that I couldn't trust them. And my problem was discernment. And my also problem was I thought it was either full open or full closed. And so what I think is to progressively keep your heart like a good country has a good border. We're still going to let in people from Mexico, but we're going to let in the right people. We're going to let in people who are not criminals and who are, here to come through legally and work hard and want to be Americans. Heck yeah, it's great. Much respect to Mexican people. We're not going to let in trafficked children or criminals or, MS-13 gang members or terrorists. And so how can we have the progressive piece by piece opening of the heart and then the progressive, respectful, medium closing of the heart? I think it's very good to have an analog spectrum with heart opening and closing based on true discernment of people, whether they're in righteousness and keeping their word. And so in 28:25, he who is of a proud heart stirs up strife, but he who trusts in the Lord will be prospered. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but whoever walks wisely will be delivered. I think there's a compromise between these intense poles that are talked about here in Proverbs, and it's trusting yourself as a prophet. I believe that every single human being has the internal capacity to be a prophet and to have a direct connection to God. And it's through study, through meditation, through good works, and through listening to wise people who are living examples of the achievement of righteousness. And if you do that, you can get clarity on what is right action and then go about doing right action. I mean, the only other option is to have some hierarchy of priests telling you what right action is, and we can already see today that that's failing. So in 28:28, when the wicked arise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. But how can we, as conscious actors, cause the wicked to perish? And is that a reasonable thing to pursue? I mean, all this child trafficking and human trafficking that's going on, is it valid to cause those human traffickers to perish? Or is it better to hide ourselves and hide our children from them and just let them have free range? I think it's better to cause them to perish, and I think it's okay to do that. I don't think that the Torah is telling us to not do that. And then in 29:7, the righteous considers the cause of the poor, but the wicked does not understand such knowledge. In a libertarian sense, I do believe in minimizing the government's forceful intervention in the economy, but I do believe that there needs to be some degree of intervention, and I think we should stack the entirety of that intervention, the whole of those chips, should go to supporting there to not be possible to have depredations on the poor. So a good example is something like 30% of the family homes in the United States are owned by large private equity firms like BlackRock. And what this does is it drives up the prices of those homes. It takes them off the market. It makes them into expensive rentals. It screws up the rental market too, because now so much of the rentals are owned by these profiteering companies who would rather see them not rented so that they can keep the other ones high price. It doesn't bother them. You know, their balance sheet is fine. And so I do believe we have to watch out for the poor. I don't necessarily think we should steal from middle class and upper middle class people and just redistribute that money to the poor, but I think we should make it that poor people have an opportunity and have a chance that if they're willing to work, that they can get the basic things that are the American dream. And then in 29:11, a fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. I think the suppression of feelings is very toxic, but I think the selective sharing of feelings among people who are conscientiously choosing to support one another, such as a men's group or a minyan, I think that's tremendous. And I do believe that I have made mistakes, like sharing my feelings with my daughter or sharing my feelings with my partner, when it's really not their bailiwick and it actually hurts them if I share those feelings with them. Really, that's my job, and this is respect to my brother Tom. That's my job to keep those feelings but still have a place to explore them and work through them. And that also has to do with my experience with God. And so those are safe places to share the feelings. I think that would be an addition to Proverbs in this way. And by the way, I don't believe we need to take the Torah as literal fact. I think a huge aspect of the Jewish tradition is commentary and is saying, well, how can we interpret this and what's the right thing with this? Because if this was all written by people, yeah, just remembering that. So in 29:18, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint, but happy is he who keeps the law. I believe that there can be, right now, revelation. I believe we are in a time of revelation. And I do also agree that a lot of the lost people are lacking revelation, or they're relying on a false revelation, which comes from a false deity, the media, the woke elites. And so I think it's important to share testimony, to welcome people's testimony, and to share your own testimony once they welcome yours. And then in 29:15, the rod and rebuke give wisdom, but the child left to himself brings shame to his mother. There is a tragedy currently in child rearing where parents are afraid to correct their children. And there's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome happening where the children egotistically learn to manipulate and coerce their parents, and the parents fall for it and believe themselves in their permissiveness and their lack of authority to be extra kind to the children. And some of this is a swing back or a reaction to how harshly people were parented. And they weren't parented with good authority that was calm and regulating and had good boundaries that couldn't be, but they were harshly parented by parents who were very busy working and who couldn't, take the time to drop in with the children. And so we need to really correct this, and we need to particularly teach our young boys to be honorable and to be upright men. And so in 2025, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. For me, trusting in the Lord is so soothing, and I do like to have faith and just give up control, but that doesn't recuse me from needing to pursue correct action, because part of the Lord's plan is to empower me and to help me do the right action. So we have to stand up against injustice, but also relax about ever thinking we're going to beat the injustice. I think part of the dynamic of being on this planet as humans with bodies is that there's always going to be a wisdom struggle. Over and over and over again, the same themes, the same problems are going to come up. We're never going to just create some Taliban kingdom of God where everybody's right, because it can't be coerced. It can't be forced. It has to come from a person being loved, a person having welcome and having a position and agency within the society, and a person seeing for themselves the value and the merit of living in a righteous way. And so 31, the whole of 31, particularly from 10 onwards, is the most huge clarity for Lemuel about a wife. And it's a deeply empowering vision of the feminine partner. And it was written when most of the world culture viewed women as cattle. And this is talking about a virtuous wife. Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches her hands to the distaff. This is such a beautiful vision of women. This is so empowering. And I think we're facing a time right now which is so sad, where after some pretty good success in feminism, now you have a lot of women becoming these Instagram, like, visual prostitutes who make their living through exploitation of their bodies and of men. And you have so many women becoming like sugar babies and like losing their empowerment and also hating men. I mean, there's a real problem in feminism, and it's getting really lost. Now, I am a feminist in that I believe that women are humans and they have equal rights. I don't think they have the right to kill a baby. It's not just their body at that point. I really just, I don't think that's an accurate argument. And I think it's important that we look at the toxic feminine and how the devouring mother and the infantilizing mother is a significant archetypal problem. And there's also a ton of women who never become integrated with their motherhood. They never really embrace it. They feel like they're somehow failing because they're not having a career, whereas motherhood is a sacred and beautiful thing. And there's an objectivization of male bodies where I've heard this more and more, women speaking about men as just like their body parts, or just because they're good looking, or just treating them as they kind of hate to be treated themselves. And I think we have to look at that, and we have to call on them and say, hey, this is out of integrity. And there's also just a tremendous propensity to abandon husbands. I think it's about 82% of divorces that are pursued by college-educated people are actually initiated by the women. And so why are they abandoning the men? There's a huge impact on families. When a culture fails to properly weave in its men, they become monsters. And it's a positive feedback loop. So all these women who are railing against the patriarchy, I think a lot of them might take responsibility and ownership for being like the mother archetype and the big sister archetype, and teaching men and teaching, sharing with love, not through wrath and hate and through, shunning and ostracizing men, but through saying, when there's a healthy expression of the masculine, where you're dutiful and you protect and you provide and you're an honorable person, but you're strong, then you will get love and children. But in as much as men these days are realizing that by doing that, it's not a successful strategy. I mean, you could be a good man and get no lovin'. So then huge amounts of men among the Zennials and Gen Alpha and among the Millennials, my generation, huge amounts of us have decided to go with one of the other three strategies because it's sensible. We're not stupid. All creatures act for their own survival and for the survival of their genes. And so the other three options are you become isolated so that at least you don't get hurt, at least you don't get, your ego destroyed, but then, you're sad and you're alone and you're kind of a neckbeard in the basement with the Cheeto fingers. Or you transition, you take hormones and you cut off your testicles so that you can become a woman and you're not a man and maybe you can get love. Or you become toxic masculine and you go do some mass shooting, or you become like Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan, or you go about promulgating your genetics. If you can't obtain the promulgation of your genetics through wholesome means, and if the women of your culture are lockstep standing against the empowerment of the healthy masculine, you're going to go with the toxic masculine. And this has happened over and over again throughout history. And so I think it's important to really take a look at that. And if we think that women are just these victims, that doesn't accord with them having equal rights. That doesn't accord with them getting equal pay. But if we think that women are equal and full humans, then they can take up the gauntlet and take some of the responsibility for saying, I'm going to choose good men, and I'm going to choose to reward good men with love and with children. And because this is so hard to get, so many men are choosing to not do it. And then that creates this feedback loop of toxicity, which the women then rail about and use as a rationale to further disenfranchise and further hate on men. So I believe this is the solution, and it's all here in the Torah. And so, well, that's about what I have to say for Proverbs, and sending a lot of love to everyone. Thanks a lot.